Hello, and welcome to another live Zeal session here on LinkedIn. I'm super excited for today's conversation. We brought an amazing guest today, and I don't want to belabor the point at all. We're just going to dive right in. So I'm going to do a little introduction for this guest because although he doesn't require one, most everyone is familiar with who this is, at least in our software development universe, but he is due to have quite this introduction. So I'm going to give this introduction, sit tight, and here we go. So my guest today gave us GitHub, the go-to platform for collaborative coding, turning solitary coders into part of a global symphony of innovation. That's right. He envisioned Gravatar. He is, beyond that, he's simplified web creation with Jekyll, even giving us a common language for software versions in the semantic version specification, also known as SEML. But that's not where his influence ends. He also wrote and conceived TOML, which we'll get into a little bit because I didn't actually know TOML was this Tom was the Tom of TOML. So that's super fun. So he has always had a vision for simplifying the life of a software developer, and all of the tools that I have been able to benefit over the course of my career that he has influenced has done just that. Simplification of the work of being a software engineer. He is a massive contributor to open source applications. He is the founder, innovator, coder, and advocate for Transparent Web. He's the founder of Preston-Werner Ventures and 128 Collective, the maestro behind countless tools that web developers all around the world swear by. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Tom Preston-Werner. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Trevor. How you doing? Well, that's a lot to live up to. I'm going to have to actually pull it together for this interview.
Well, I know that you're one. You have your bios. You're a man that has done so many things and contributed on so many levels. And I, for one, am just honored to have you on this show and to be able to sit here and interview you. And I'm also honored to be able to partner with you on some ventures, which we'll talk about coming up. So thank you. Welcome to the show. And let's dive in.
All right, let's go.
So I've known who you are and were for many years. I've known of you. And then I took a deep dive a while back to dig deeper because our paths started to cross in the development universe. And I came across your blog. And first of all, I just wanted to say, if your software engineering career doesn't pan out, maybe creative writing, you could be an author because you are quite a creative writer. I just want to throw that out there.
Oh, thank you. Well, I did at one point think I was going to be an author. I had decided that. I was on some airplane and I was like, I'm going to be a writer. And I really got into writing, and then I did not end up becoming a writer. But I have fancied myself in many different professions along the way. So
that's amazing.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, it shows. So did you ever go to school for writing, or was it just a passion of yours?
No, it was just part of what I was doing. And I love the written word. I love beautiful language. I love reading. And, it's such an amazing, if you think about it, the ability to write and transmit our ideas and knowledge in that way, in the kind of vibrant way that language allows us to do that. Like that's really one of the most special things that I can think of, and has allowed our species to flourish the way that we have. Like it's just such an amazing tool. To not appreciate and want to be good at that, to me is I don't understand. Like it's such a tool, such a powerful tool. That's why I love it.
Well, it shows in your writing. Absolutely. You definitely take care to, like reading your blog posts is like reading short stories. And and it's just fantastic and a lot of fun. One of the things, there's a couple of blog posts I would definitely point people at if you want to learn a bit more about Tom, or just the roller coaster ride that Tom's been on. His blog started, I think, back in 2008. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's probably about, well, this blog started with the creation of Jekyll, really. So that would have
Oh,
been
there you go.
2008, 2009. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And so there's a couple of posts that I would definitely send people to. There's one that's fantastic. Starts out really with a little hilarious synopsis as to how the post came to be, and it's called "Rejected Bio from the Setup," and that's where you can learn a lot more about Tom and Tom's past.
Yeah, that's a good one. I have a few that are like that. They're things that I've written, or they're speeches that I've given that I haven't published. I have a few because I've given a few sort of speeches at various events, and I have not published a few of them. I gave one at the commencement of my elementary aged kids, sort of the graduation for the first class that this school was a fairly new school that they were graduating. That we're going to move on to high school.
Uh-huh.
And they asked me to give the commencement address, which I did, and I really liked it. And I haven't published it, but I've been meaning to for like 4 or 5 years. So I have a few.
Well,
I have a few more like that one.
You've got a platform for it, so you definitely should post it. I'd love to read it because, again, it's also fascinating. But one of the things that was super fun for me was how well you sort of documented the stories of some of the things that you built along the way. And the first post on your blog is called "How I Turned Down $300,000 from Microsoft to Go Full-Time on GitHub." And it's really like this short story of the first year of GitHub. And I read that and it was like, oh, it was so inspirational and scary at the same time. Can you tell me a little bit about what that time was like?
Yeah, I mean, so I was working at a startup called PowerSet at the time, a search engine. We were trying to do kind of the things that you can today do with AI, kind of like using AI to do really good semantic kinds of search. That was what we were trying to do in like 2007. So I worked for that startup. I was early-ish at that company. I was like employee number 30 or so, but it got me up to San Francisco. And while I was there, I started using Git in the company. One of my coworkers and I were working on a piece of software, and we decided to use Git. My friend Dave had showed me Git. He introduced me to Git. He was like, "Check this out. And we were playing around with it to see what it was, about. The Linux kernel was using it, so like it was something, right? Like This was worth investigating. So we started using it. It was really hard to get set up and use because you had to put it on your own kind of server and give people accounts, and it was kind of a pain. And we were still using Subversion at the company, but we used it kind of locally between ourselves on this project. And then we would occasionally sort of push that into Subversion and share that with the rest of the company when we needed to. So we started using it there, and it was really great, but hard to use, as I said. And so that's really where the idea for GitHub came from, is like, hey, here's this amazing tool that nobody can use. So I think when you see those types of situations, like there's often opportunity there. But that was, I just started working on it, and I, started working on it with some other people, and really it was like all of my projects, really, none of them come from these. I don't sit down and create master plans for what I'm going to do. I just kind of start following my curiosity and saying like, maybe there's something here, or there's this missing, there's a gap in the industry where things could be easier, better, or how can developers work together better? How can we share? How can we, use this tool better? Or, things like Jekyll was like, I keep losing my blog because I keep putting my content into databases on random sort of servers that then I forget about after a year, and then they like delete them because I haven't used them, or I stopped paying, my credit card expired and I never, I didn't realize until it was too late. And then, all my data's gone because I didn't back it up because whatever, right? This is like in the early 2000s, and you're switching between blog systems and whatever, then your WordPress thing gets hacked, whatever, right? Like, so I kept losing my weblog content. I was like, never again. Now I have Git, and I can make Git. So again, it's just following the needs of things. And GitHub was exactly the same. We had no idea. I had no idea if GitHub was going to be a thing or not. Like, it could have been nothing. It could have, who knows? You never know until you try. And that's really how I do all my projects is, like Toml. Toml I just wrote down when I was drinking by myself because my wife was off at some conference or something. And I was home alone on a Friday night. And I was like, well, I've had this idea for this configuration language that is maybe better than YAML. So let me just write it down and be funny about it and release it to people as a joke, basically.
And for those who
so if you go back in the history,
it's an acronym. TOML is an acronym for Tom's Obvious Minimal Language.
That's true. Right. So it's a configuration language. So things like Cargo. So Rust's package manager Cargo uses TOML, for instance. You see, and Netlify uses it for their configuration. So a bunch of people use it now. Like it's a real thing used by tons and tons of people. But it started as just I just wanted to put it out there. I had it in my mind. I kept complaining about YAML and how ambiguous it was. And I hate reading YAML files because I never know if something's a string or not, because you can have strings that don't have quotes around them. It drives me crazy. So I wanted to build something that was unambiguous. That was like the main goal.
You could open it and read it.
TOML file. Yeah. You know exactly what types everything are, number one, right? It should unambiguously map to a hash table, to like a dictionary. Anyway, if you go back in the history of TOML and you go to the very first commit, you'll have a good time reading that version of the TOML spec because it is quite cheeky, shall we say. But you were asking about GitHub. So anyway, yeah. So I was working at PowerSet, and we had worked a fair bit on GitHub on the side, nights and weekends. I was basically doing 2 full-time jobs at the time. I would work 8 hours at PowerSet, and then I'd go home. I'd basically work 8 hours on GitHub. So we got it to the point where it was ready to charge people to use it, and we had people in the private beta that had been using it, but we weren't charging them. So once we started charging people, on that first day we were making like $1,000 a month or something. Like it really, over the first couple of days, like it really, people wanted to pay for it, and they had reached out before you could pay for it. And people were like, I would like to pay for this because I want this to exist. Like this is already so much better than what I was doing before.
Oh yeah.
And at that point we knew we were onto something. And so when PowerSet got acquired by Microsoft, and they had retention bonuses that they were going to give for people because they wanted the company, as many people as they could in the company, to come over, and they were absorbed into the Bing product essentially.
Yeah.
So that's where the 300,000 was. That was going to be my sort of retention bonus. So they offered that for me to come over and work for Microsoft, which I declined. But it was not maybe as perilous as you might imagine, because we were already making money on GitHub, and it seemed clear to me at the time that there was a huge opportunity there. So it wasn't I didn't have to stress about it too much.
Yeah, you'd made it to revenue.
We already had revenue.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, okay. But still, that's really hard to get a product to revenue, and to do that as like the after hours gig. That is amazing. That's really hard to do. There's a quote from that blog post that I wanted to read that really I feel like sort of sets the table for many more adventures, and that is, when I'm old and dying, I plan to look back on my life and say, wow, that was an adventure. Not, wow, I sure felt safe. Yep. That feels indicative of sort of like maybe many of the decisions you made, or at least that big one right then and there. So
yeah, that is kind of the fundamental way that I live my life, which is about, and this is actually what my commencement speech that I was talking about before is about. It's about risk management. It's about risk taking and thinking about what are the right risks to take. So I'll give you the brief version of this commencement speech, which is, through life, you're going to be faced with choices. And when you're making choices, there's always not always, but usually there's some risk involved, or the choices that you really are like thinking about and having to really mull over in your mind, the ones that are not obvious. There's some risk involved. There's some trade-offs. And so you have to look at the upside and the downside. So my example was of a bad way to make a decision, a bad risk to reward sort of ratio here. So when I was a kid, I'd ride my bike around a lot, as kids of my generation often did, around our neighborhood. I grew up in Iowa, so kind of like a small town Iowa. And we lived on a hill, and I decided that what I was going to do that would be cool was I was going to start at the top of the hill on my bike, and I was going to close my eyes, and I was going to ride down this hill and see if I could make it to the bottom. Which is, I was probably 10 or something, right? 9 or 10. And in retrospect, that was a bad choice, because what happened is I made it about halfway down the hill, and I ran my face into the back of a parked pickup truck, and I broke out my front teeth.
Oh my gosh.
That was the. So it turned out, no, I could not make it to the bottom of the street with my eyes closed. But so here's the thing though, like looking at it, you can look at the risk and the reward. So the reward would be like, wow, that was awesome. I rode down this hill with my eyes closed. What a thrill. I made it and I didn't die, right? Like that's the reward, which admittedly would be pretty cool. The risk, however, is that, you smash your front teeth out, and now for the rest of your entire life, you have to like go to the dentist and get like your crowns replaced on your front teeth, every 10 or 15 years, and pay a bunch of money to do it, and go through all the pain and embarrassment of having broken front teeth, and et cetera, right? Like, so the downside is quite large. The upside is like a momentary thrill, right? So this really, in my mind, cemented that you need to be better at risk management. That is really what decision making is about. So then when it comes to things like, should I move to San Francisco to take a job at a startup that could go somewhere or not? I was living in San Diego at the time that I moved up.
Gotcha. Doing
my own thing. I was what was I doing? I was working for a company called active.com. They like, it's like registration software for marathons and sporting events and stuff like that. Anyway, it was a good job, paid well. I liked it. It was working with great people. But the opportunity seemed larger, right? So what's the risk and the reward there, right? The risk is that I'm leaving something fairly stable. I owned a house down there that I was, had a mortgage on. I was, I had my friends down there. I had a whole life down there. And I was going to uproot all of that to move to San Francisco and take some new job doing some new thing for a startup that may not exist for very long. Who knows, right? Totally different environment. Like I have to sell my house, which was, the market was like not doing well at that point. So like there's a big risk there. So that's there's a lot of risk, but then the upside is like I could be at the mecca of technology, right? And this is like 2006-ish, 2007.
Okay.
And things are really exciting in San Francisco. Like amazing companies are here. And I came to visit and I walked around and it's like every other door had a sign on it for some company that like I knew and used. It's like Twitter was here, Instagram was kind of starting here. Well, I don't think Instagram was here yet, but I don't know, a bunch of stuff everywhere. Like logging engines, like just it was amazing to walk around. And you'd go to the cafe and people would be like talking about compilers and stuff, and it was just so great. Right. And the upside would be like, hey, I could join the startup. I'd be doing Ruby, which I love. And, I could make a bunch of money because it's a startup. And like, if it did super well, like, hey, look, Google did all right. Maybe this search engine, will be like Google. Anyway, so it's the risk versus reward there. You say, well, the upside is sort of commensurately large compared to the downside. And so this is a risk worth taking. And like, what's the worst case scenario too? Worst case scenario is like, it doesn't work out. I'm still in San Francisco. There's still a lot of people doing technology and hiring people that write code. And I'll have this experience of working at a startup and I could just go work at another startup. Right. So the downside is the worst case scenario is not very bad.
Right. A blip in between jobs.
So exactly. And so this is how I tend to live my life, which is take risks, but risks that don't have extremely large downsides. Right. So I do a lot of, I like to do sort of extreme sporting types of things or things in aviation. So I have my helicopter pilot's license, which I did over the course of a number of years ago now. So like I fly helicopters sometimes. I haven't been up in a few years. I'm not current anymore, but there's risk there. Obviously, like being in a helicopter can be risky, but not if you do it well, not if you do it right, not if you pay attention, then it's quite safe. As well as other things like, I go snowboarding in the winter. There's downsides. You can get hurt, and I have, but not so bad that it's irrecoverable. And meanwhile, you get this giant upside of like really enjoying nature, the outdoors, and like doing something in the winter and appreciating
Right.
snow, right? Like you have to have a reason to like snow, I think. So
Hmm.
winter sports I love, and being in the mountains. Mountains are my favorite. And so what's the upside and the downside? So this is always what I'm thinking. And without taking risks, you're never going to go anywhere. You're never going to
Mm.
improve or grow yourself. Like throwing myself into uncomfortable new situations is something I do regularly because it's how you grow. It's how you figure it out. And probably the first time you do it, you're going to suck at it, you
Yeah,
know?
for
The
sure.
first time you give a talk, like a public talk, probably not going to be the best talk of your life, but it gets you far enough to know what to change to be better next time. And until you start that journey, until you are uncomfortable and then can look back and be like, oh, wow, I actually could be better at this and this and this, then you don't know how to improve. And so that's another sort of theme of my life is always learning new things, being uncomfortable, sometimes failing, sometimes trying a thing and it not working, right?
Mm.
And that's fine. I have tons of open source projects that nobody uses, and that's fine.
But you have some that everyone uses,
I have some that
or
lots of
many,
people
many,
use, right?
many people use. Yes.
So that's the
Yes.
upside, right? And
Yeah.
there's risk too. There's always
Yeah.
risk in putting your work out there. The risk that
Sure.
nobody's going to care, people are going to make fun of you, or hey, you did this thing wrong. Like, what is wrong with you? But the upside is, hey, like a lot of people could benefit from your work, and you could have more opportunities in your future because of that work that you put out there.
Mm-hmm. Uh, Here's an interesting question, and this is I just am asking for a spitball here. How many uh, open source projects would you say you've started at one time or another? And again, just a guess, just a random guess.
Um, I mean, I tend not to really properly release them until there's
Sure.
something
Okay. So maybe
there.
not open source, but like,
So
yeah, with that possible intention, something where it's like, how many projects have you started with the potential, of open sourcing them or spinning them into a business?
yeah, I don't know, 20 or 30 probably.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not like a crazy huge number because I usually
You go deep.
I usually have a pretty good idea of what I want to do before I sit down and start coding. So I have probably a few readmes around
Uh huh.
that where there's no code or anything or no, full spec or whatever, right? So, and
Sure.
I started writing specs more than I started writing code because you can write a spec fairly quickly that could then lead to something that has a larger amount of change than a code base, like semantic versioning and TOML. I never wrote any code for either of them. I've never written a TOML parser in my life,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
but many other people have, right?
Right.
The interesting thing to me was the specification. It was thinking about a language that could be better for a specific purpose than anything else. Building the parser itself I would do that. That would be interesting, but I haven't had the time to sit down and do that. And it was exciting to me to watch other people do that. And so like writing, and this is also the power of writing is it's just ideas. It
Yeah.
doesn't even have to be
So,
code. And like, is that open source? Is semantic versioning an open source project? I mean, kind of,
yeah.
yes.
So where do ideas come from for you? Where do ideas come from? Like, how do
Well,
you?
I'll give
If
you a
yeah.
recommendation of a book that is one of
Okay.
my favorite books, which is called Where Good Ideas Come From. I think it's
There you
called
go.
that. Or where good I think it's where good I think it's by Stephen Johnson. Anyway, one of my
Okay.
favorite books, Where Good Ideas Where Ideas Come From.
Where
Why am I
ideas come
blanking on
from?
this now? Um, he has this concept called the adjacent possible, which I love. The adjacent possible is this concept of everything that could essentially be discovered because it's right next to the things that we currently know. So
Mm,
imagine
mm-hmm.
all of the things that we know, all the things that
Okay.
we have already discovered. On the edge of that pool of known things lies a sort of a boundary, an edge, where there are a bunch of ideas that if you combine them, they could lead to a new thing that becomes known. And this
Mm,
is often where ideas come from, is the bumping together of components of things that we already know. So for instance, we can't create like the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek.
mm-hmm.
We can't do it. We don't have the parts to do it. So
Right.
we can't make that leap. That crosses the adjacent possible. and goes into the like, it goes further. So it can't be created right now.
Mhm.
But what can we create right now? Well, we can bump AI into lots of different things and create
Mhm.
all kinds of cool stuff, which we are doing right now. So you see this rapid expansion of what's possible because of some new invention, right? So some advance in
Right.
AI expands the possible a little bit, but then all the things next to it, all the things that AI touches, there's opportunities for that to rapidly expand the adjacent possible. And so that to me is the best way of coming up with ideas, good ideas,
Mhm.
especially plausible ideas, ideas that are practical and can be done
Yeah. Yeah.
and that can be useful for people are by studying and thinking about like what are the new advances that we have. So what are new things and how can we combine that with other things, other industries, other
Yep.
ideas that are in your purview to then come up with some combination, some combined thing that we have the parts for, that people are ready for, and that people need. So each of the
Mhm.
things that I've created are kind of like that, right?
Sure.
And what's interesting is
Absolutely. Yeah.
that
It's the
GitHub,
next
when
step,
we
an evolution of something.
right, it's always it's always just expanding. So the possible is always expanding into the adjacent possible, and that's where you want to live. That's where you want to be, is on that sort of the boundary of what's known, right, and help expand it. So this explains also why oftentimes things are discovered simultaneously
Mm.
by multiple people. So, for instance, calculus was sort of discovered, um, but simultaneously by both Newton and Leibniz, like almost at the same time, totally independently, different places in the world,
Right.
but basically at the same time. And the reason is that the math that was necessary to understand the concepts of calculus were available to everybody. The building blocks were there. We had the tools, we had the sort of knowledge necessary to get to that next step. And so it was just a matter of time until someone discovered the right kind of combination of things and ideas and put together some notation to be able to describe and do calculus and
Right.
solve problems using calculus. So it was going to happen. I think this is interesting to see that some of these types of ideas are kind of inevitable.
Sure.
That like the invention of calculus was going to happen. Who was it going to be, right? It was going to be someone probably in the fields of math and whatever, right? Like, so there's some
Yeah.
set of people that are plausible to do that, to make that discovery slash invention. But oftentimes it's multiple people. So here's an interesting corollary to GitHub. When we launched GitHub, within a few months of that was Bitbucket. If you remember,
Oh, I remember
some of
Bitbucket. Yeah.
Bitbucket's not super popular today
Was that
comparatively, but
Atlassian or
Atlassian purchased it. It was
they
some
purchased it?
guy
Okay.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
built it. But Bitbucket was created at almost exactly the same time. So
Hmm.
GitHub was Git and Bitbucket was Mercurial,
Right.
because you had Mercurial, which was a competing distributed version control system that was out there, was a building block available, but was also not super easy to use. Right? It wasn't hooked up to any kind of web application, to make it super easy to sign up and share and whatever. So we on the GitHub side and the guy that was building Bitbucket, we had kind of the same sort of discovery simultaneously, and then it was just a sort of a battle of the market, right? And
Yes.
and you go from there. But like that's really interesting. Like, why would that occur?
Yeah.
That's weird, right? Like, why would these two things happen simultaneously, or why would there
Because
be
because it was primed, right? The foundation was there, and smart
exactly
people were
the,
working
the
the problem.
parts were all there,
Yeah.
right? And this was not like anybody could have taken Git and built a web app around it, right? Like this is not.
Right.
You don't have to be the smartest person in the world to have that idea and go do it, right?
Hmm.
So, but being there and being curious and always welcoming new ideas and saying like what is the value in this, right? So not being
Hmm.
cynical. I think it's important to not be cynical. I think you can be skeptical, but it's important to not be cynical about new creations, right? So
Mm.
we look at things like LK99, the superconductor, the
Yeah.
potential room temperature superconductor, right? Like
Multiple at the same time. Like
it,
again.
talk about like if that's real, which it's not
Yep.
looking so good
That's
at the moment. But
right.
if that turns out to be real, that would be
Every
one of the
paradigm
biggest
shifts.
sort of like you can combine that with like a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And make
It breaks
all
so
kinds of
many industries and
crazy
things.
new things, right? Like that would
Yes.
expand the possible in a way that nothing has since maybe the transistor, right? I think AI is a case that could be like that. I think we're
Sure.
maybe not quite at the level where AI is that. It feels like it is. I don't know if it actually is. It's obviously amazing. You do amazing things with AI now,
Yes.
right?
Right. Well,
There's still a
and
long way to go.
I think that one of the differences is AI is such a it's a new it's like a whole new world, right? A whole new space. Whereas uh, the in the conductor space, we already have lots of applications we can apply that thing to, right? So if this happens, if this is real, superconductor is real,
Right.
at room temperature, like we can apply that to a lot of things because that landscape's laid and we know what we'd use it for. Whereas AI, it's like we don't quite know what we can use it for yet. We're trying to
Right.
figure that
Right.
out, right?
Yeah,
So
we don't fully understand it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I definitely I had a bunch of things I intended to talk with you about today, and I want to get into a couple more of those. I should have known that this would have probably evolved into. I should have built it differently, something like like business masterclass with Tom Preston-Werner or something like that, because just like hearing from you about again how these ideas come to be, where you search for them, how you work the problem, as well as how you then weigh that risk management and cost benefit analysis, and like those things right there are so useful and valuable. I appreciate you sharing those things today, because I'm taking a ton of value from that, and I know everybody who's watching is getting a lot out of this as well. So
Yeah. Well, we can go
incredible.
wherever you want to go.
Well, I did want to. I'm curious. So it feels like you've always sort of you've built tooling, and some of those tools you've spun into products, and then you also built some products, right? That were not necessarily like development tooling. But I'm wondering, so you pivoted. I don't know if it's a pivot at all. It's really seems more like something that you just naturally are drawn to. But you moved into working to do what you do to the JavaScript space, right?
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, so the current state of JavaScript, it's evolved over the last decade as frameworks came to be, Ember and Angular, and then React came along and just has been dominating the landscape. But JavaScript is still JavaScript, and in all of its inherent amazingness and horribleness. So I guess what I'm curious about is what drew you to start working on what I now know as RedwoodJS, which is a framework for JavaScript.
Yeah, there were a couple of threads that I was following that really brought me to creating RedwoodJS. So one of them is I co-founded a company called Chatterbug with Scott Chacon, who was a co-founder at GitHub as well. So after GitHub, we got together and we wanted to do a project again. And he had this idea for language learning. He had moved to France and wanted to learn French and was having trouble doing that using like all the different kind of tools that he could find.
Mm-hmm.
Found that going to in-person classes were kind of the best way to do it, but he didn't like the inflexibility of those classes. Like you had to go to a specific time and they were group classes, so you weren't actually spending a lot of time sort of practicing. So the idea was create a language learning platform that allowed you to connect learners with tutors that were native speakers and have the platform be the connection for that, and also have the platform bring the curriculum so that the tutors could be really anyone with a teacher mindset that was a native speaker. So they wouldn't have to bring their own curriculum. So this was the idea behind Chatterbug. So he and I started working on that. We hired a team for that, building it out mostly in Berlin. So I got to spend a lot of time in
Oh, that's
Germany,
neat.
which I love.
Sure.
My ancestry is like more than half German, so I feel
Okay.
like I go there and I eat sauerkraut and
There's
I feel very
connection.
fulfilled as a
Yes.
human being. Yep. And it's great. And Berlin is really an amazing place, and the people that are there, really great. So we're building this out, and we started it with Ruby on Rails because that's kind of what we knew. That's GitHub is all Ruby on Rails.
Mm-hmm.
So we build it in Ruby on Rails, kind of in the normal way, but then we hire a React developer and we're like, we should be doing more front end stuff with React. React is really powerful. It's modern. It's what everybody's using. So we start building the front end with React. So we're doing less with Rails sort of template rendering ERB stuff,
Mm-hmm.
more with React on the front end, more and more. And then eventually kind of the whole app is now React on the front end. And then we need to build a mobile client because if you're a learning platform, you need a mobile client.
Yep.
So we start building a React native mobile client because that makes sense. We have React knowledge, so let's hire some more React people. So we have a React native mobile client that works on iOS and Android. And we build a GraphQL API to do that. And we use Ruby. There's a Ruby GraphQL library for
Mm-hmm.
building GraphQL APIs. So we use that. So now we have a Rails app that is mostly just serving kind of React front ends
Mm-hmm.
and talking to the database to get the data and just basically just sending a big JSON hash to the top level React component.
Right.
So that's what Rails is doing. And then we've got a separate GraphQL API that is feeding the mobile client. So at this point, it's getting a little weird because we're not using Rails really. We're using mostly Active Record and kind of the routing stuff.
Right.
But then something weird happens, and because we have a really competent GraphQL API, we have a team of people that understand GraphQL, and they built this really great GraphQL API. Now the React developers on the front end team want to start consuming the GraphQL API instead of using Active Record
Mm.
because it's a better interface to the data that we have than trying to go directly into the database.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you have a pre-existing GraphQL API that is well designed, it's a joy to consume. So
Mm-hmm.
now we
Yeah.
have so then all the new stuff in the app starts just being React components doing data fetching, client-side data fetching to the GraphQL API, and then rendering the site. So starts to look more like a SPA, single page application.
Right.
And now Rails is really just serving like the React files. That's
Right.
and not a lot more than that, right? For those
Sure.
new parts of the website. And this was a really productive way to do things. And we had one GraphQL API that was serving both the web client and the mobile client, which was nice because now we weren't having to duplicate the business logic in the Rails app and the GraphQL API. There was just one
Mm-hmm.
place that was for business logic, and that was GraphQL API. So now we've got this architecture, and it's starting to feel really good and productive. And we're using storybooks so that we can prototype React components in isolation. Like it's beautiful. It's all working
Wow.
together great.
Yes.
So that's one thread. The other thread is I've worked with Netlify for many years since the very beginning, since it was just the two co-founders, and was an early investor and have invested in many rounds, and I'm on the board right now. So I've always wanted to find ways to make Netlify more awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from my Jekyll background. That's how I got to know them in the first place.
Gotcha.
So that whole idea of static hosting and then using JavaScript to enhance, like I really like that. I'm a believer in that. And so
Mm-hmm.
when they added an easy way to deploy Lambda functions by just writing the code for your Lambda function and putting it in your Netlify code base and pushing it to GitHub, and they deploy it and they push up your Lambda functions to AWS and host those, that was now an easy way to kind of do programmatic stuff. Like the normal way of deploying AWS Lambdas before that was like you have to package them up as a zip file and then upload them to some random thing, and then AWS would like to play them into Lambda. It was super weird, right? It was super annoying,
Yep.
hard to version, and like just a mess. So Netlify made that really easy. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool? The building blocks are here now, like talking about the adjacent possible. Like here's an opportunity for an adjacent possible. You've got a really good CDN, so you could statically deliver a React front end.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Lambda functions that are super easy to deploy, and you could put your business logic into Lambda functions. And then you'd have a database, right? And your Lambda functions could be deployed around the world. So you'd have kind of this edge behavior. Now, the unsolved thing is kind of the database, but like, I don't know, we'll figure that out. And so I'm wanting to build a framework like this. And I've talked about that for a year or two, probably even before RedwoodJS was a thing at all,
Sure.
trying to figure out like, what could this look like? What would this framework be like? Because I had this prediction that I thought that it would be a first class thing to deploy your full stack web application to Netlify, and that would be using sort of Jamstack architecture,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Which it could fit. A React application, single page application, fits that really well. And so that then combined with the architecture that we were using at Chatterbug, also fit that kind of Netlify Jamstack use case.
Gotcha.
So that's where Redwood came from. So I wasn't really writing a lot of JavaScript, but I was like, this thing should exist. So I started partnering with Peter Pistorius, one of the co-founders now, co-creators of RedwoodJS, who was one of our guys at Chatterbug. We hired him to work on the mobile client. So he knew React Native really well. He knew React super well, JavaScript, TypeScript. He knew all this stuff really well in a way that I did not.
Uh-huh.
And so we started hacking on what became RedwoodJS together. I started to sort of improve my skills, and he was in there to do the really hard stuff. And so we just started putting something together and seeing if we could deploy it to Netlify and if it would work. And that's kind of that's why RedwoodJS exists. Now it's evolved to a place where it's not about the Jamstack at all. It's really a general purpose. Like you can deploy it on servers. In fact, it's kind of better that way because my predictions about what Lambda would let you do turned out to not come to fruition. Okay. I really thought that Lambdas would be like this general purpose deployment thing that would replace containers. And they really have not. Like AWS has not evolved them in the way that I thought that they would. So that makes the architecture for Redwood a little more challenging because you implement your whole GraphQL API in a single Lambda and try to deploy it on a single Lambda because it's hard to split up a GraphQL API into multiple Lambdas, which is kind of an abuse of what Lambda is supposed to be for. I accept that. I accept being wrong about my prediction that
you learned.
Lambda would
evolve. You evolved, yes.
Exactly. But it turns out like deploying Redwood to a traditional server makes it work really great. That architecture is very flexible. That kind of SPA architecture can be serverless, but it can also be server full and be just as happy. And in many cases, even happier, right? It can be, you don't have cold start times. You know what your costs are going to be, et cetera, right? So there's pluses and minuses with technology, like always. So Redwood has evolved since that. But to answer your question, that's why Redwood exists.
That's why it exists. That's where it, sort of the roots came from, right? The threads that led to it. So Redwood has been evolving over the last couple of years, and we're getting close to what is going to be. I know your big moments. You frame them, your big projects. You frame them as epochs. And you're getting ready to shortly, I guess, release what you're calling RedwoodJS Bighorn, an epoch release, which is a pretty big paradigm shift. Can you sort of talk about that shift a little bit? This is sort of that move away from the sort of Jamstack optimization to React server components. There's a lot of stuff in there, but what can we look forward to? Like, what's the future of not just RedwoodJS, but like, how do you see the ecosystem of JavaScript evolving, and how is RedwoodJS playing a role in your mind? How do you see it playing a role?
So the next epoch of RedwoodJS will be called Bighorn. So we haven't released it yet, but we wanted to give people a roadmap of where we're going. And so Bighorn will be all about React Server Components. So that will be the defining feature of Bighorn, is that it will be the first version that truly supports React Server Components. So React Server Components are a new kind of architecture in a way for React applications, where it sort of defines how you're going to run React on the server, and you can have components that are designed to render specifically on the server. So imagine your web page. You have some things on your web page that are not really going to change depending on what the user does. And then you have other parts of the web page that will change depending on what the user does, and they need to be interactive. React Server Components are really designed to only render once on the server the parts of your page that are not going to change, still leaving the client to handle the components that become interactive, though the server will server render everything that it can, including client components, during its first pass, so that the first page that you load is as much full HTML delivery as possible. And then the client components are shipped down and rehydrated client side so that they become interactive. So that's kind of the basic principle of React Server Components. It's really just a way to say, here's how you should be executing your server-side React components, which people have been doing for a long time using SSR, server-side rendering, where you can render your page server-side, send it over as HTML, and then rehydrate So this is not a new. This is like not a completely brand new concept. It's really more of a codification, a standardization of like how
Standardizing.
you would actually write your components with that in mind from the
Right.
beginning. And along with this comes suspense and streaming. So suspense is a thing you can use in React where if you wrap an async component, something that would return a promise, something that's not going to finish right away, in a suspense component, then and this is separate from React server components, but it comes
Mm-hmm.
along for the ride. These two things
Right.
work well
You get
together.
them together. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the streaming that's available in modern versions of React, at that suspense boundary, the page will the React will stop rendering that server side and keep rendering the rest of the page as much as it can. Meanwhile, it's executing what's inside your suspense boundary.
Mm-hmm.
It'll deliver to the browser as much of the page as it can that's done, everything
Mm-hmm.
that it executed server side that it didn't have to wait for. So your browser can start rendering that. And then once the result of what's inside the suspense boundary completes, it will now stream that down because the connection is still open. It'll
Mm-hmm.
stream that down and React will insert that into the correct location where that suspense boundary was, all on that same single connection. So it's just a
Yeah.
really nice way of splitting up your app and being thoughtful about what do I want what do I want the user to get right away in the first initial page load?
Mm-hmm.
And what can they wait for a little bit longer? And all of this solves sort of the SEO and OG tag, the open graph tags for unfurling in Twitter and stuff. Like those things need to be present on the page when it's first sent to the client in order
Yep.
for those things to work well as SEO and OG tags. So it's a solution for those as well. Just like SSR is.
Yeah.
It's an evolution of SSR that React has really embraced and said, we're going to help define how this stuff works. So that's what we
Awesome.
want to do. We want to implement this in Redwood. So right now you can do this with Next.js. They have the app directory, and Next.js they've shipped you can use React Server Components. They're kind of the first real implementation of React Server Components.
Mm-hmm.
We're hoping that RedwoodJS will be kind of the second.
Right. And yeah, I mean, you're getting close. You're shaping up. You're looking to ship that this fall, like in September, correct?
I would hope.
That's what
Well,
we're
we have the
shooting for.
conference, which we can talk about. So, the end of
Yep.
September,
That's
we have the first RedwoodJS conference. Now, we probably will not have a production-ready version of it by then because
mm-hmm.
there are challenges in implementing React Server Components.
Sure.
It's not super well defined because it's sort of it's a thing in progress. We have the Next.js implementation to go off of. We're working closely with the React team, but some of the things we have to figure out kind of the hard way by reading a lot of code and looking at other people's implementations. So,
Right.
and by that I mean Next.js, really. But there's a couple other projects. There's one called Waku, WAKU, that has been really interesting. They're implementing React Server Components. So they have a framework that they're
Okay.
building.
I'm not familiar with Waku.
So
Yeah.
there are, yeah. I mean, you can go look at it. It's
There's a
just,
number of.
it's a
Yep.
brand new thing. But they're trying, and so we reference their code sometimes. We're like, oh, how are they doing this thing? And ours is built on Vite, where Next.js
Mm-hmm.
is built on Webpack and their Turbo repo stuff. Anyway, so that's where we're going to go because we believe that that's what modern React is going to look like. It's going to be React Server Components,
Right.
and if you don't provide React Server Components, then your React framework is going to start seeming pretty outdated, and people are going to opt to stay on the React train because this is where
Right.
React is going. They've made it
That's
pretty
where
clear that
React's
like
going. Exactly.
React
They've made
Server
that. Yeah.
Components are the future of React. So from that
Yep.
element of JavaScript, the future of JavaScript, I 100% believe that React Server Components are a step in the evolution. Of course, this stuff will continue to change and evolve and be refined, but having that kind of functionality and power available to you is amazing. And it also unlocks something else for RedwoodJS, which is the ability to use RedwoodJS without having to use GraphQL. So from the beginning, I wanted to use
Mm-hmm.
GraphQL as the protocol, as the mechanism for the client fetching from the server and having a single sort of backend place for your business logic. It turns out that makes it kind of challenging for people to use your framework as a sort of experimental like test
Right.
bed,
It's a heavy
right?
lift.
So
Yeah.
people reach right. So people reach to Next.js for like, oh, I just need to hack something together for my weekend project or prototype an idea or whatever. we find the people that are very successful today with RedwoodJS being more startups. And so most of our marketing is aimed at startups, people building like real companies, and they find great success with Redwood. We would love to see more success with sort of the weekend hacker kind of crowd, like increase the top of the funnel, make it easier to get on board with RedwoodJS by not requiring GraphQL. And so React Server Components gives us a really good bridge to doing that, because in a React Server Component, you just will have a transparent API. It's just very natural with React Server Components to do your data fetching server side on that initial page load, and you can reach directly into your database to do that. So you don't really see an API as such. It's sort of built transparently for you. Makes it work really well with the types, no GraphQL at all, like just as simple as possible. You've got some React stuff, you've got a database, use Prisma to grab stuff from your database, put it on the page. We'll handle all the intricacies of what happens when you're client side and you need to get that data. Anyway, we'll do all of that for you, but with the idea that you can continue to evolve your application when you need, say, a mobile client and you want to use GraphQL, because GraphQL is amazing for serving data to mobile clients. If you want to build a GraphQL API, we have maybe the best GraphQL API framework in existence for you to do that while still remaining inside the Redwood. I'm not kidding. It's amazing.
I know.
The GraphQL support is really amazing.
Yep.
So if you want a GraphQL API, building it with Redwood is really a joy. And now you can serve that to your mobile client or terminal client or whatever you have that's not a web client. But then, like in the evolution in the story that we had at Chatterbug, your front end developers, now you're a larger company, probably you have GraphQL API people, you have front end people writing React. Now those React people are starting to say, hey, that GraphQL API is looking pretty nice. Yeah. Make it very easy now for them to consume the GraphQL API from the React Server Components. And now you've got the power of reaching directly into your database with Prisma, or for many of your needs, just use your GraphQL API. And we make that whole thing and that evolution really easy to manage.
Awesome. So you're there. This is sort of a big move, a big pivot from being initially a Jamstack-y framework to being really like a full stack React framework.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's not a pivot first. As such. It'll be serverful first, because you always have a server when you have React Server Components, but that server could be a Lambda function, which is how Vercel makes it work, right? So interesting to note that really the only implementer of React Server Components today is a serverless platform, right? So it's obviously possible and can be done very well. Now there's challenges in doing that, but we will make RedwoodJS still work on Vercel and Netlify. But it's really, with some of the things like we're adding real-time support for GraphQL, so GraphQL subscriptions and live queries, those things will really want a persistent server of some sort. They use server-sent events to do, instead of WebSockets like other things might use. They use server-sent events, which is an HTTP spec way of doing basically what WebSockets do.
Yep.
You'll want something that gives you a persistent connection, which is hard to do with Lambdas. They have opinions on how long you can keep a connection open to a Lambda function, et cetera. So yes, RedwoodJS, when we are authoring things for RedwoodJS, we will not limit ourselves to things just because they might not work on a serverless platform. We will make them work in a serverful environment. And if we can, we will make those same things work in a serverless environment. But we will not be at all anything you would consider to be a Jamstack or serverless optimized thing, right? That's not why we're doing things with Redwood.
Sure.
We're doing them to be the best web application framework for JavaScript and TypeScript, period.
And that's, again, I think anybody who's ever followed your work, that's always your goal, is optimization, really creating like great tools, simplifying the complexity, giving access to powerful things through the simplicity, right? And then sewing it all together in something to create better standardization, right?
Yes.
Amazing work. I'm a big fan. This is why Zeal, we've been following Redwood and then also really jumping in, trying to help support the framework and, create some conversations, do some education. And then working to partner with you on producing the upcoming RedwoodJS Conference, the first annual
The conference.
conference. Yes,
That's
I'm
right.
super excited. I'm going to go ahead and pop it up here on the screen. And so in September 26th through the 29th in Grants Pass, Southern Oregon, we're going to have this amazing conference, Redwood Conference, sort of in the Redwoods, or Redwood adjacent, as you would say.
Redwood adjacent.
So anyways, I'm super excited about that. Tell me, what can people expect from the conference? I know, and I'm excited. We've been putting this together, and every single next speaker, all the different things that are coming online, it's like super exciting. But let's talk a little bit about what people can expect at the conference.
Yep. First of all, go to redwoodjsconf.com and you can find the website and all the details, the speaker list and the itinerary, the schedule for it. So this conference is intended to be sort of, we're putting this conference on to talk about, because of RedwoodJS and to talk about the future of Redwood and React Server components, but it's a lot more than that. So there's 2 days of talks. So the 2 middle days, the 27th and 28th, are the days of talks. And it's going to be about Redwood, obviously, but also about design. We have speakers coming to speak about design, security, some various components of RedwoodJS, obviously, like GraphQL. We have people from Prisma there doing a workshop. We have some speakers from a company called Fixie AI that is an AI company, and they're doing a workshop as well on the first day. So the first day is the workshop day. There's 3 workshops. So Apollo workshop, an advanced Apollo workshop, GraphQL, an advanced Prisma workshop, the database ORM, and then an AI, how to use LLMs with React. So they have a library called AI.jsx that makes it easy to leverage LLMs using React components.
Which is amazing. Cool. I'm super
so
excited about that.
Yeah. So it's about everything in and around web application development that you're going to need to be successful. So, like I said, security, marketing, business, raising money, like a whole gamut of things. And you can look on the schedule to see what kinds of talks we're going to have. But it's going to be a fairly intimate crowd, 150 or so people, 170 once we get the core team. Like most of the RedwoodJS core team is going to be there. I'm going to be there. We have another workshop on the first day where you can get together with me and David Price, one of the other co-founders of Redwood, to talk about your startup. How are you using RedwoodJS? So for a couple of hours. So this is really a deep dive on working directly with you on your project and hearing from you. But it's going to be amazing. My favorite thing about the conferences I went to in the early 2000s for Ruby were that they were fairly small, a couple hundred people at a venue. Mm-hmm. And it was better when the venue was not in a big city, because mm-hmm. when you put your venue in the middle of a big city, people want to go out and see the city. And that's nice, right? To do that.
Sure.
But it's actually better for a conference when it's somewhere a little weird, because you stay at the venue and you really get to know people. And if you're going to come if you're going to travel and you're going to be there for some event like this, getting to know the people is the number one most valuable thing to do. And the relationships that I made at those conferences, like that's why GitHub exists. The people that I met are the people that I started GitHub with. The people that I knew to respect from their work were the people that gave talks at these conferences. And so many opportunities for me came out of those early Ruby conferences where everyone was excited. Everyone was just excited to be there and create something with Ruby and Ruby on Rails. And it was really a magical moment. And so I'm trying to leverage that idea, to use those ideas with the RedwoodJS conference and make it a really special conference for people. That's why this conference exists. So that people can be together, meet each other, share ideas, listen and hear ideas. But really it's about you, the person who comes to this conference. And then on the 4th day, we have an optional day where we're going to go out and do activities around Grants Pass. And it's going to be beautiful weather, because late September is the most glorious weather in the West Coast.
It is beautiful.
Or not coast exactly, but that area of the West. It's going to be amazing. And so I'm just so excited to spend time with the people that are interested in like the future of what web application development could look like.
Awesome. I'm excited too. And again, like, we've talked about this, that special conference experience, the ones that stand out in my mind of all the conferences that I've been to, they are those more intimate, off the beaten path where you get to really connect with people. And so again, I couldn't be more excited to be working with you and participating in putting this conference on. Zeal has taken on bit off a bunch to try and help produce the conference. And RedwoodJS is, obviously it's the RedwoodJS Conference. So it's been a pleasure working with your team and building out this amazing thing. And I just can't wait for it. It couldn't come sooner for me. So looking forward to that. Again, you can get tickets on redwoodjs.conf. RedwoodJSconf.com. There you go. We'll post that in the notes as well. Don't miss out. Tickets are they're selling. We're gonna definitely sell out of the Founders Workshop, and then the day one, which is the 3 workshops. That's also something that you definitely need to take some action on if you're interested. So, Tom, I appreciate and I'm honored to have been able to have this conversation. I have so much takeaway. I've got a book I'm going to go read, and I look forward to having more conversations like this with you in the future, and just hearing more of the way your mind works and the way you think. So appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. It's been great working with you on the conference and other things, and I'm excited for September.
I wanted to plug a couple of things for as well. So obviously, go to Tom's blog if you want to read through the sort of path of someone like Tom through the history of building great things. It's very entertaining. It is, again, it's a great read. It's an adventure. I mean, that whole thing, your blog could just turn into like an adventure novel for developers and business owners. It's super fun, and so many nuggets, so many good nuggets in there about, that we can all learn from. So check out his blog. He's also a founder of Preston-Werner Ventures, which is your angel investment side of your world, and then also founder of the 128 Collective, which is 128collective.org, and that's like more philanthropic work. Correct?
Climate-focused philanthropy work.
Climate-focused philanthropy work. And I'm looking forward to, do you have spaces where you're talking about that work that you're doing? Like, are you
not as often? We have a team that works there, so I don't spend quite as much time with that team these days, but you can definitely keep up with what we do there on the website, and there's a Twitter account for there as well.
Awesome. And then you also, in support of companies starting and that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, combined with the efforts that are going towards building the RedwoodJS framework, you have created the Redwood Foundation, Startup Foundation, or Fund. I'm sorry, Redwood Startup Fund. Not Foundation. Sorry.
Yeah.
Redwood Startup Fund.
So the Redwood
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, Redwood Startup Fund. So redwoodstartupfund.com if you want to learn more. So if you're building something with Redwood, a startup, and you're looking for funding, then I've carved out a $1 million chunk of the angel investing that I do to be dedicated to funding 25 to 50K checks into startups that are building with RedwoodJS. Because I love to support new companies. I love working with startups. I love angel investing. And I especially love angel investing in companies that are using a technology that I believe in, RedwoodJS, and where we really work with startups to help them succeed. We have a Redwood Startup Club that we get together monthly, and we have a Slack channel to really help people learn from each other. So it's kind of a whole community of startups there based around that. But if you are building with RedwoodJS, then you're eligible to receive money from Preston-Werner Ventures via the Redwood Startup Fund, 25 to 50K checks in that range. And you can check out the website there for details.
Yes. definitely check that out. Again, you can find Tom on his blog, tom.preston-werner, preston-werner.com. Find him on LinkedIn and at prestonwernerventures.com and 128collective.org, redwoodjs.com. He's got a lot of amazing things going. Definitely look into those. And again, thanks again, Tom, for being on the show.
Thank you, Trevor. Absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you at the conference.